we're not going to sugarcoat it. The negative adaptations are going to happen. Hunger is normal. Like, your sleep might be disrupted, but the indicators that the deficit is occurring, your body is experiencing those physiological changes.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our weekly Coaches Corner. Maria Birova here, Clean Health Master Coach and WBFF Pro. Today, I have a guest you have not yet seen for a while on our IG Lives, but if you're an OG Clean Health follower, you may have seen Kim Leggett do our IG Lives in the past. And today we're going to be talking about negative adaptations to dieting. If you guys have any questions, make sure you click the little question bubble below. That way we could pull up your question on screen. And like I said, we're going to be talking about negative adaptations that come from dieting and how you as a coach can navigate them and postpone these things so that your clients can have successful dieting phases. So we're going to bring Kim on. I did do a little intro of who you are, but I'll let you take the wheel for that. For anybody who's been an OG follower of Clean Health, is very familiar with you and doing our IG Lives as an educator for us. But like I said, give yourself an introduction of who you are and your history with Clean Health, and then we'll dive right into our conversation today.
Yeah, sure. So I used to be where Maria was. So I used to run the IG Lives, and I used to be a part of the Clean Health Master Coach family there. I still am, but on a different basis. So I come in, do some lives, create some content, things like that, and some other exciting things that will be upcoming soon that we'll announce shortly, I'm sure. Yes. Otherwise than that, I'm an online coach. I run PT as well. I also now co-own a gym in Melbourne as well.
Congratulations.
Formerly used to be, thank you. Formerly used to be a Miss Universe Malaysia in the past, so I have a bit of like beauty pageant experience as well. And apart from that, I'm also a WBFF competitor. So hopefully one day we'll wear a crown like my girl Maria. So we'll see. But that's a short little intro.
And you are currently prepping for a show, am I right? Like about
I am, yeah. Yeah, I'm about like 8 weeks out now. So I have to say that this topic is very relatable for me and anyone else that's on a comp prep, like the feels in this topic, like completely.
Exactly. I think you're in the heat of all of it, and I'm on the opposite end of that. I'm about to start entering my dieting phase, and we're going to be negative adaptations you may yourself be starting to face, and really help coaches that are watching us, or even anyone who's doing our dieting phase themselves, learn how to hone the adaptations that are very normal to experience. So we'll just start off with that and talking about what are some, expected and normal things that come with our body's response entering a diet phase.
Yeah, sure. So I think just to preface the conversation, like it's probably good to understand what do we mean by negative adaptations of dieting? So generally when you're doing like a dieting phase, the results get kind of like romanticized, right? And people don't talk about the stuff that you have to go through and all the feels and all the negative stuff that happens. Yeah. So when your body kind of goes through that dieting phase, it wants to kind of hit a set point. So it might be like a certain body fat percentage or a certain body weight that your body actually feels comfortable at. So let's say like if you're like an 80 kilogram person and you want to drop 20 kilos and become like a 60 kilo person, your body actually starts to kind of fight your attempts at dieting and cutting that weight in ways that it's kind of sending you some signals and saying like, hey, like, I'm actually not liking this process. And it's almost like an evolutionary process where it goes back to try and like retain that, AKA like a survival mode. Yeah. So when you try to like, drop the calories, your body fat starts shifting, you start to become like more hungry, more irritable. Yep. Sleep becomes an issue. Or like even certain things that are really subtle, like drops in motivation can occur. And all these things are what we kind of title like negative adaptations of dieting. So all these little like key factors will occur in the dieting process. And I think the thing that people don't like to kind of explain or I guess admit is these are completely normal. Like they suck, but when they actually happen, it's telling you it's working. It's a part of the process, like, yeah, a deficit means you're eating less and it's uncomfortable, but uncomfortable is where all this actually happens. I think it's just important that we have to, I guess, acknowledge that when these things occur, it's what we do then with that. Do we embrace it? Do we start implementing things to make the process a little bit easier for ourselves? So it's just about like knowing what to do when these things occur.
Yeah, and I think it's also, you touched on it, where these are the signs of resistance that our body will, trigger for us when we are in a dieting phase, what you do with it. And I always talk to my clients about stepping into that resistance, right? You are dieting year round. That's the whole point, right? Your body doesn't at that state where you're eating less, doing more. So when you feel those triggers and you know you're in a dieting phase for X amount of time, it's about how you react to them. And I think someone touched on where, you know, your mood, your sleep, things like your satiety, right? You're not going to be satisfied with the meals you're eating. Things even like drops in libido are common. All of these things are going to be things that you're expected to face. And they're also a line of when it becomes, you know, borderline dangerous too, right? So
that's right.
I wanted to touch on you with what are the differences? You know, males and females do tend to experience certain levels of both, but I think the females, we have that risk hormonally to start impacting that, and I want to see like, what can you say about that as well.
So I'd say, like, you know, just like as like an umbrella kind of statement here is like when it comes to negative adaptations of diet, there isn't much of a difference between men and women. I kind of do feel like, from personal experience, I feel like women can tolerate dieting maybe like a little bit better. I don't know whether it's just like from giving, you know, like what we can do with our bodies, but I feel like there's that tolerance there just a little bit more. The men watching this going to hate me, but it's just from my personal experience. I feel like that's the case. But, I would say the difference in terms of like what physiologically can occur is like the cycle can get lost. So I touched on this on a reel I did for Clean Health just like last week. And typically it just means that once we start to drop body fat and the weight starts to drop, and even like if the calories are dropped to a certain point for females, and this can really depend and differ from person to person. So like, you know, if you're eating 1,500 calories and I'm eating 1,500 calories, and we're both in a dieting phase at the same time, your cycle may stay, mine may go. So we could be implementing like the same strategies to kind of like keep ourselves, you know, as healthy as possible in the process, but you might react differently to me. So it's just one of those things where our body, again, starts to shut off processes that it doesn't feel are necessary, where it's just trying to keep us like alive, and, you know, our energy stores up to just keeping us, you know, breathing day to day, which again is why I said like it kind of acts like it's in survival mode. So reproduction will go, the cycle will go, and like, you know, it's also contextual, right? Like we have to kind of consider when we approach a client, when we're talking about dieting and being in a fat loss phase, like, you know, if you're a competitor and you need to be super lean on stage, if the cycle goes, and it might happen, it's, to be honest, pretty probable for a lot of females that are competitors. We just have to deal with it when it happens and how we kind of recover from that. If you're like, you know, an everyday person that just wants to look better, you know, day to day, like a regular female, and you come to that point where you kind of get instances or signs that might occur when we're dieting, we can then kind of implement things to stop that from occurring. You know what I mean? Like give you a refeed or whatever it might be, just because it's circumstantial. You don't need to push your body to that limit. So it's just something to consider as well.
I do also think, even touching on the more of the competitive athlete experiencing the loss of their menstrual cycle, like you said, there are some people who are going to experience it at 1 calorie intake, some may not experience it. Oh, like, you know, I have done back-to-back shows and my intake was on my last show and my expenditure was quite high, and knock on wood, I used my menstrual cycle, where I know I have other peers and friends who did at much higher intake or expenditures. But I do also think it's a good point to note, you know, when you are entering a dieting phase, one of the things you can do to set yourself up for success is, what is your starting point, right? What is the foundation to a dieting phase? Are you starting low maintenance intake to begin with? Are you doing excessive amounts of cardio and expenditure to begin with? Because if you know where to cut from, you're going to face adaptations much sooner than expected, and could potentially that fine line of like, this is becoming more detrimental for your health than it is like dropping the body fat and seeing the changes you want to see. So how do you determine what is a solid foundation or set point to dieting phase to prevent any of these adaptations from occurring?
So like, I actually like love that you brought that up, because again, this is like one of those hard truths that not everyone wants to hear, but is such like a good point to consider when, you know, if you're a coach that you're getting a client that wants to enter a fat loss phase, is you have to have that tough conversation and dig deep to actually understand the history of the client in terms of dieting. So like, you know, if someone wants to just lose fat, achieve a certain result, or enter a dieting phase, it doesn't mean that they're ready. And that can be a hard thing for a lot of people to accept. Like, people will come with you and say, I want to lose like 10 kilos, I have a wedding, whatever it might be, and they give you a time frame. And then you start digging and you start asking these questions like, hey, you know, when have you last dieted? When were you last in a fat loss phase? Or what were your calories the past like 3 months? Questions like that start to paint the picture for you as to whether this client is ready for a fat loss phase. Only because, and I give the analogy to a lot of clients in terms of like money in the bank. So like, if you don't have, like, let's say $5,000 in the bank, and you want to start like chipping away from that to pay for something, if you've got $5,000 there, you can do so, right? So we can kind of like pay for things as we go. It's same thing as like a deficit. So there's calories to take from that 5,000. Where if you've only got like $2,000 in the bank and you want to still buy the same thing, there's not much there to pull from. So it's that same sort of idea where you're already running the risk of running yourself ragged and running yourself in the ground because we don't have that foundation that you haven't saved beforehand in order to spend. So I'd say like a couple of things that you just need to make sure that are there before you start is your dieting, like your previous diets have been, I guess, at least about like 16 to 20 weeks before now what you're trying to start, just because you want to have ensured that your body has recovered and you've given yourself time to, I guess, adapt from the negative adaptations. So you've recovered. So there's a recovery phase that's occurred. So like, you know, you've brought your calories back up to maintenance, and not just calories, but you have to understand that deficits aren't just created from calories alone. It's also from activity and energy expenditure, which we get from exercise and cardio and NEAT. So you kind of want to start pulling back those things that were chipping away when you were in your last deficit, to make sure you're at a point where you're kind of like cruising, you know, you're just doing steps, day-to-day activities, and you're eating maintenance, which is different from everyone. I think the other thing as well, like, that's all the things that we kind of understand and are kind of quite easy to grasp. But the other thing is that the client needs to be mentally ready to be in a deficit as well. Like, the psychology of a client is so important. Dieting is not easy. Like, you'll attest to that. I'm sure many of you that are watching would attest to the fact that deficits are hard. Like, the things we're talking about, who wants to experience like the loss of a cycle or to be more irritable, lowered libido, things like that? Like, they're not fun. So like, if you're someone that is willing to kind of understand that regardless of how you approach your deficit, whether it's an aggressive approach or if it's a moderate approach, and by that I mean how much calories or how much of a deficit you're creating, the negative adaptations are going to occur. It's inevitable. It's just about how quick we reach those adaptations, or when do they start coming into play for someone. So it's kind of like you have to be mentally ready, and just kind of know that either, you know, you've got a coach that knows what they're doing, so they know how to kind of like push you past those plateaus in either a fat loss, or how they bridge the gap of, you know, you're feeling disruptions to your sleep. Like, what are the tactics to get over that hump? And just things like that. Like, you just have to kind of be very aware that, you know, you're giving yourself a time frame. You just have to dedicate this kind of 12 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever it might be, to feeling a little bit uncomfortable and be ready for it. If not, you know, there are always approaches around it too.
Yeah, and knowing that those negative adaptations are temporary. And if you are working with a coach and have your post-diet plan, things like your medical will come back. You're going to start feeling more satiated. You can actually maintain your results and start increasing your nutrition intake and decrease your output as well. And that's why it's really important to have a post-diet plan. 100%. And I think that gets audited, whether it's by Gen Pop and even athletes. You know, I've had prep where I've neglected my post-show phase, and it's bit me in the butt, where it's, you know, excessive body fat, and then facing the negative adaptations of not having that plan post the diet. So what would you say critical points, you know, when you are at the end of that dieting phase, you're at the peak of those adaptations where you may have lost cycle, you may be experiencing low libido, extreme hunger. How do you go from that point to a point where you can come back from that, but not necessarily reverse all of the progress that you've made? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so I'd say like a couple of things to assess when you're feeling those feels is like, have you, again, depending on the client, so let's say a competitor, you know, have we reached the result? So another thing I think that's important is like when it comes to dieting and these negative adaptations taking place, it's like, you know, have you as a client, you got to ask yourself some questions like, have I committed 100%? Like, am I like drawing out this dieting phase? Like, you know, sometimes when people don't hit their targets, they start dragging out the dieting phase. So a diet shouldn't be like super long. It shouldn't be like forever. It's just temporary. So I would say like, have you reached your, you know, like your target, like result or look or whatever it might be? Have you competed? If that box is ticked, then we go, okay, cool. We look at where you've ended this deficit. So like, you know, what are the ending calories? What level of activity are we doing? And then again, we have to kind of consider still that previous dieting history that the clients had, like in the past. So even it might be like a year ago or 2 years ago, or even 10 years ago, depending on the person. Only because that then dictates our approach. So like, I'm going to use you and I as an example here. So like, you know, you might have never dieted before, just did a deficit. I've dieted for heaps, like years and years on end. Now I'm just finished my deficit as well. So we're both ended at the same time. How do we then get out of this, right? You could just go up to maintenance tomorrow and you'll be fine. I would probably have to almost give myself as long, if not longer, of a time frame to reverse diet to actually get my calories back up to what they were previously. Only because my body is not used to those higher calories. Yours would be much more comfortable because that little phase of the diet that you've just had is kind of unknown to you. You were like, you know, your body was like, woo, what's this? And responded. Where mine's actually so used to it, mine's not used to those higher calories and what should be normal for me. So it kind of just really depends from person to person. So like, I would say, yeah, you got to just like, you know, to get back to the question is like, look at the approach. I'd either reverse slowly or bring the person back up to maintenance. You then want to kind of make sure that, especially for females, the hormone profiles are there again. So I'd be maybe doing like a blood test, just kind of checking levels, making sure that we're upping the calories, especially dietary fat, in a way that's, you know, we're kind of like restoring those hormone profiles. And then we look at the activity. So we got to actually start bringing back, like pulling back the activity. So pulling away cardio slowly, bringing those NEAT levels down, and then just start to actually look at training in a different way. So I think something important is like, you know, if you're training for aesthetics at a certain time, it's probably time to then look at performance or something else that's going to help you just bridge the gap in that improvement phase, where you might start to regain body fat. And to be honest, it's normal. Like, you know, your body doesn't need to look super lean year round. Like, yeah, it's great to have goals, but again, like, you know, you want to live in improvement season. Like off season's awesome. So like, you know, you want to like live life at those times. So it's about just being kind as well.
Yeah. And hey, Brian, thanks for joining our live. I also wanted to touch, you touched on reverse dieting and slowly increment upwards. And I also want to talk about recovery diets. That is something that, you know, I myself had to experience coming off of my back end of the show, because knowing that I wanted to compete on the back end of the year, I know I didn't have the capacity to slowly increment up because I had to dive back down into a deficit again and comfortable. And it's like knowing what your client's goals are post that deficit. An athlete, do they have a show coming up after? And, you know, compensating, you know, yes, ideally I would have loved to you know, keep that conditioning, but my trade-off to gaining a bit of body fat right now is getting my maintenance intake so high and having expenditure quite low, so that when I'm entering that prep for that world competition, which is just a few months away, I have a good starting point for that. Because if I did not do that, if I was taking itty bitty step by step, yes, I would have probably looked a bit leaner right now, but I would still start that next dieting phase quite difficult. And I would phase those out quite quickly and get myself back into a hole that I didn't want to be in. So it's really clear with your coach and your client, the communication of, okay, what's the goal? Why are we doing this? And what's coming after, right there? I also find that, you know, if you have a client that's struggling to even stick to their deficit for that period, that the slow and steady incremental increase after can be like pulling teeth. They're like, I already full, I'm ready to be done. So it's like finding like, okay, can we get comfortable with an X amount of range of weight gain to compensate back up to that, you know, maintenance, body stable, and you're sustaining everything. So I did want to also talk, you touched on refeeds briefly at the beginning, to mitigate these adaptations during the dieting. So can you chat how you implement them, why you would, and what type of athlete or client is most suitable.
Yeah. So like when it comes to those negative adaptations, what you want to do as a coach is when you have a client that's in a deficit is when they start to reach these like indicators of, you know, like they're hungry, irritable, etc. There are some options there, right? So refeeds is one, a diet break is another. So they're very similar, but you would kind of apply them at different times. So a refeed is normally, you know, you give yourself about 2 to 3 days at maintenance or maintenance calories, I mean, or you give the person just like about, I would say, twice the amount of the carbs that they're having, which is obviously increases the overall calories. And they do that for like 2 or 3 days. It brings up, it kind of like increases their mood again. It gives them that like little push again to like go, okay, like I've had a breather. And you'd kind of do that, to be honest, sometimes also just for a psychological break from the client. Like when a client is especially in a like aggressive deficit, just knowing that a refeed is coming like next weekend, like changes their mood, changes their whole approach. So that's again, like as a coach, you'd want to be asking your clients certain questions. Not just like, oh, hey, like, you know, you hear them complain that they're hungry. Like it's about how are you feeling? You know, are you still feeling motivated when you go to the gym? These are kind of like indicators that you need to kind of check in with your client to know how they're feeling, because it gives you more insight into whether they are experiencing like those kind of like less obvious adaptations. Yeah. So like you'd implement like a refeed again, just like a couple of days, higher calories, and then drop back into the deficit that they were previously on, but at a higher level. So let's say like if I gave you a refeed at 2,500 calories, where, you know, the day before you were at 1,500, I might then start you again at like 1,800. So we then start kind of like chipping back down. So that's kind of like one thing we would do. If you do a diet break, that's a little bit different. That's a longer time frame. So like you'd give yourself like a week, sometimes for some people 2 weeks. It is not necessarily ideal for everyone, only because like, let's say a competitor, there's a certain time frame and there is a like an endpoint that we need to get to. Yep. And when you implement a diet break, that actually extends the dieting phase. So that just adds on like, let's say a week or 2 weeks extra for you to achieve that goal. So it actually just pushes out and stretches out the dieting phase a little bit when you do a diet break. But again, depends on the client. They might need a break, or we actually might say like, hey, they're actually really run down here. Like, you know, the period's been, their cycle's kind of lost, or, you know, like the sleep's really disrupted and they just need a break. So it just really depends. But I think you just have to be really intuitive as a coach with your client and in touch with how they're feeling. Yeah. You need feedback, and you need someone that's experienced as well, I think, to kind of guide you through that process, because it's not like something that you can just throw in a refeed. You know, if a client's like, let's say, you know, like really finding it hard, just because someone's finding a diet hard does not mean that they need a refeed. I think that's probably important here for me to just mention. Like, you know, if you're eating really low, like, you know, let's say like in a 40% deficit, which is quite aggressive. Yeah. And you're like, like, I really feel hungry. Like, I just need more food. You know, I, as a coach, I might actually not give you a refeed just because you feel hungry. Like, yes, it's a negative adaptation, but if the goal is not far off and, you know, the weight's still falling off and we're still progressing, it doesn't mean you don't need a refeed. Like, you have to also look at, again, we're in a deficit for a reason. It's typically to lose body fat and or weight. So if we are starting to hit a plateau, which again is the other side of this, then you can implement these things like a refeed or a diet break, because that's when it will start to work again and we'll start to get the process moving again. So there's like a lot of factors, but yeah, that's kind of how you'd implement them.
I would say add to that, it's where are you at with your progress, right? Are you stage lean where you're getting quite close to prep? Maybe it'll benefit you, but if you're pretty far off from where your goal is or carrying an excessive amounts of body fat, a refeed may not necessarily benefit you. And actually eating behavior in relationship with food is hindered prior to coming into that. Think about it this way of, you know, a refeed being like a trigger, right, of those core behaviors that you had prior to starting a more structured dieting approach. And I have seen my own clients where we take, whether it's a diet break or they're going on vacation or something like that in the midst of a diet, how sometimes post that period, there's lingering compliance issues a week or two after, due to just reducing certain, you know, quantity of food, but different foods if you're flexible with your approach, which actually is harder when you start dieting again. So it really comes down to, you touched on this, biofeedback from your clients, asking them questions, not just taking measurements and photos, but stress, hunger, sleep, digestion, you know, looking at their food and how they're eating, not just how much, right? Like, how are they their intake, the quality of food. I think oftentimes, and now it's a trend, right? We push flexible dieting. You don't need to restrict, but we're not going to neglect as health coaches to promote quality food choices, because they will be better for you. You can't deny that whole food sources will be better for your health and wellness overall. So it's also that too. I think it's an important thing that gets looked over by coaches.
No, 100%. Yeah.
One of the things to kind of wrap up our live is, I want you to give some insight on what would you say are some of, like, let's say the 3 takeaways anyone can, comes to, you know, entering a dieting phase and expecting the negative adaptations and how to face them head on. What would you say are your takeaways?
I would say, like, I think the key thing again is just, like, we're not going to sugarcoat it. The negative adaptations are going to happen. Hunger is normal. Like, your sleep might be disrupted. They're not things that I'm saying, like, are good things, but they're indicators that the deficit is occurring. You know, your body is experiencing those physiological changes and it's responding. So it's not like a bad thing. I think it's just about being as well, like, true to yourself and honest with yourself as a person entering a dieting phase. Like, is this something that I want to go through? B, how do I want to approach the diet if I am, you know, willing to go through those things? So by that I mean, like, just understanding that there's not like a one size all fits approach. Like, you can do a deficit in a conservative way. Like, you can have refeeds regularly if you need to. You know, you can go at like a get out approach where we go aggressive, and then that just means that the dieting phase is a lot shorter, but it means that you got to kind of suffer a little bit for a little while, but you know, the payoff is, it's a lot shorter time frame. So those are, I'd say, like, my top 2. And then other things is just to know that, like, there are approaches around it. So, like, you can have refeeds, you can have diet breaks, but it's also about, I guess, knowing that, like, you know, you need to commit if you're going to be in a dieting phase. Not just to the process of the deficit, but also the afterwards. Commonly, like, you know, I feel like every time we refer to competitors, like, we're giving them a bad rep, but, like, you'll see time and time again, like, females especially, I'll say, like, who are competitors, can often struggle with the post-com experience, just because that isn't that recovery phase after such a stringent dieting phase, because it's like 20 to 24 weeks sometimes for some people, or they're on back-to-back shows, and then, you know, like, you would be tired. Like, of course you're going to be exhausted from dieting, and you want to experience, you know, like, eating out with your friends and socializing and normalcy again, but you actually have to commit almost as long, if not longer, to that post, like, comp period, because you got to recover and do it slowly. Like, you can't just go back to normal life, because what you just did isn't necessarily normal, you know? So, like, I think it's just about, you know, being open and being well versed in, what does this mean? Like, what does a diet mean? What does it mean for me? And what are the implications? And how do I recover from that? If I do experience them, like, again, it does not happen to everyone. Everyone is different. Everyone is going to approach a diet differently. It has to be individual, but how you respond will be different. So a lot of things to consider, but I think the more you consider them, the better it will be in terms of your results, because you've taken everything into consideration.
Yeah, and I think the one takeaway I could add to that is simply, whether you're a competitor or Gen Pop, when you are faced with resistance and you know that's what's supposed to come with the dieting phase, learn to step into it. Actually enjoy and embracing it, being like, you know, my hard work is actually paying off, and sticking through instead of caving in to those things. Like, your hunger, you're caving into it. You know, if you have a set plan, you have your set intake, follow suit with that so you can get out of that period sooner. So that is watching, we're going to post up this live right after. If you have any questions that we may have not answered on the live, you can drop them in the comments section, and Kim and I will answer them for you, as well as in the comments when we post this. Drop any questions or topics you'd like Kim and I to discuss in future lives, as we will be doing more frequent live sessions with Kim and our other master coaches as well. So this is a great learning experience for you guys to be more interactive and ask us questions on the spot. Kim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Back on our live live streams and schedules.
It's good to be back.
Conversations
yeah, I
with
can't wait.
We'll chat again soon.
All right, thanks. See you guys. Bye.